Karina, welcome to the podcast, The Future of Sales. Today, we're welcoming Karina Burgdorff Jensen, who is a candidate professor, almost finished her PhD, just have to do the defense, in sales at the University of Albert in Denmark. So, Karina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Régis. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're just really happy to have you on board. So we know each other already for several years. When you started your PhD, you contacted me, and we stayed in touch ever since. Had the pleasure to visit you in Denmark and to work with you. So, Karina, you're an ideal candidate for the podcast, also because you started your research 7 years ago. And as you know, the format of the podcast is to say, hey, what did you notice in sales 2015? What do you notice today? What were the changes that you've seen? And, hey, how do we move on from here? So, Karina, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about how did you get to start your PhD in 2015?
I got started in sales the way most people do, by accident. So my sales career started because I didn't know what to study, and the only job I could get actually without having any qualification was a sales job. And I worked my way up through the system and ended up being a sales coach, working with salespeople, training salespeople in a large sales organization. And doing that, my job was to listen in on conversations between salespeople and the potential customers. And I started noticing that we teach people to go through these linear processes in sales. We have sales method, we have sales processes, and I seem to find a little discrepancy in that some of my best salespeople didn't follow any of the rules. And some of the unsuccessful salespeople followed all the rules and still didn't succeed. And that made me curious, right? So I started to think about, something is broken. Something is broken in the way we do sales. It might have been that these processes were really effective earlier. I don't know how it looked like 20 or 30 years ago, but seems to me it doesn't work anymore. So that was the offset for my PhD research. I tried to find information, couldn't find it, and then applied for a PhD to do that research myself. And that's when I got in contact with you.
I remember very well. And because you drove all the way from Denmark by car because there were no flights available those days. I remember. So basically, what you're telling us is that if you read any sales book, they will talk to you about the process, the linear process of a sales opportunity. And it's true that we train people also on skills for each part of that process. So what I'm hearing from you is that, it's great, but that's not reality. The good people, they do something else.
They do something else. And I wanted to understand what is it that distinguishes the really good salespeople from the ones that are maybe not so good. And one of the great things, I hope I thanked you before, but I'd like to do it again because you put me on to the co-creation path. Understanding that it's about doing something with customers instead of doing something to them and trying to force them through a specific process, right? So listening in on conversations, what I found out is that when the magic happens in the conversation is actually typically when you stray away from that typical process. So imagine that you're going through a conversation and you have this idea that first you do a pitch or an introduction. Then you have to ask the customer about what's going on with you and go through a lot of questions. Then you present your solution, and then you do some kind of negotiation and a close. But what if when you're asking the questions, the customers interrupt you saying, what is this all about? What are you offering, right? This is the customer kind of breaking you away from where you're going. And if you are able to handle that and go into that and have a real discussion like we are having that is not scripted and not maybe moved into that specific context, that's when everything becomes good and when you start to connect with each other.
All right. So you started your research, I remember 2015, 2016. But then, as I remember, COVID got in the way. You were doing your research. So tell us a little bit, how did that actually interfere? Because suddenly sales processes look quite different.
Yeah. So what happened was, early March 2020, when everything closed down, everybody was scared. We all thought, I think globally, sales are going to halt. We can't do this. We cannot sell online because we've been talking about how important it is to visit our customers, to travel to see them, to have these face-to-face meetings. But in reality, looking at numbers from all over Europe, we now know that sales actually sustained and many companies actually hit their targets and went above. And when I say many, I mean like more than 80-90% European companies, right? So we were still able to sell. So what happened? We moved the sales process online and we took away some learnings from that.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, that it is possible to do complex selling online, or more complex than we thought we were able to do. But also we learned something about the sales process that is different, mainly that different parts of the sales process have, are good online and some are good offline. So let me just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah.
When you have an existing customer that you already have a great relationship with, having a meeting like this, we know each other, right? So we don't need to start to build trust and establish a relationship because we've already met and talked many times in person. So we can jump into a conversation quite quickly. But if we'd never met before, this might not be the ideal setting to get to know each other, right?
Yes.
So in the beginning of the sales process, being face to face and visiting that customer might be a good idea. But then we also know a little bit about the content of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting. In a sales process, we put this sales process or this method down, and then it's like then you do you talk to the customer, you try to discover their needs, then you present a solution. It looks like it's done in one meeting, but in reality, it takes place through a lot of interactions on a lot of channels, right?
Yes.
It's an email, it's a phone call, it's a meeting, it's a workshop. They have different purposes. So we also found out that when we are together like we are right now, something fundamentally different happened. First of all, we don't see each other's full body language, which is one thing, right?
Yeah.
We're not in the same physical space, so that means the atmosphere, which also plays a role, is not the same if it's cold or if it's warm, or that's something to bond about. But more importantly, our interactions change. So we've now been talking, and we've done this many times about sales, and we both love that.
Yeah.
And usually it's a little bit more dynamic, right? Because we will get up and talk and write something on a board. We would interrupt each other because we get caught up in what's going on and develop each other's ideas further, being creative together. We don't do that online.
Yeah. And that's the thing that really fascinated me with when you talked about your research, is because we've all been talking about the trust and the problem about building trust and everything, which is fine. But then what fascinated me with your stories, when you say, well, wait a second, it's about interrupting each other. Yeah. Just like we're doing now. I would have probably interrupt you much more if we were face to face than the mode in which we are now. So generally we would say, it's better not to interrupt the other person. But your research seemed to suggest otherwise. No, we need to interrupt each other.
Yeah, at least it's so. If you have a meeting where you want to present a solution and show something to someone, and it's like information, or you have to gather information, then it's fine. You don't want to be interrupted in the middle of everything, right? You want to have a structured conversation. But if we need to be creative and innovative when we do the co-creation parts, then the interruption is actually very important. because that's where we build on each other's ideas. That's when the magic happens, as I say, when we go off script. So imagine being in a creative situation and someone is talking like I'm doing now for a long time, and you have all these bubbly ideas, but you have to wait because you're third in line, right?
Yeah.
So before you go to that place, I mean, you might have lost it, right? You might have lost the energy. So for the innovation, for the co-creation, we need to interrupt each other. It feeds the conversation. It gives us energy. It fosters creativity. So with that in mind, that type of conversation should definitely still be offline.
Okay, I quite like that because I also teach on sales with regards to innovation, and one of the things I was even teaching yesterday is with regards to design thinking. Is one of the things that we know, if you want to have creative ideas, don't search them in you; they're among us, and it's by having conversations with each other that those ideas emerge. And we need to spark off those ideas of each other. And so I really like when you first spoke to me about this. I said, yes, we need to interrupt each other. There are moments in that sales process where creativity is needed and we need to spark each other. So last time we spoke, you also talked to me about, you've done some surveys, some research about what does sales need now? Because we're out of COVID. Well, hopefully we're out of COVID, at least for the moment. So what's happening now? Are we still going online? Are we going offline? What's your research saying there?
So first of all, we're still landing, right? We're still trying to figure out in sales what to do next. So that's a really good question. I believe full-heartedly that the next step is hybrid. So it's all about what we just talked about. It's all about leveraging from a sales management perspective your resources. When does it add value to send my salespeople into the field to visit the customers? And when is it sufficient or maybe even more productive to have a meeting online? Because we do know that in general, meetings that take place online are shorter and more effective due to the fact that we don't interrupt as much and we don't spend as much time just having, cozy conversations about, how things are going in general. So going through the sales process, we need to recognize when to be, face to face and personal, and when to be online, or when to even go completely without, any type of personal communication and use a whole other channel like email or whatever it is. And we need to figure out when to do what. But that also requires changing the sales organization, because sales organizations are built around this setup, right? We have so many companies that have, issued cars to all their salespeople, expecting them to drive around visiting, customers 4 days a week, being 1 day at the office. So the office might be a little smaller because we don't need to have room for everybody, but we have 8 cars. Now maybe you should have 1 car to share and then a bigger office. So there's things changing there. Also, if you're a salesperson and you have been taught, to visit, to go out, to experience, to feel with the customers, then maybe you don't want to be sitting at home at the office doing, calls online. A lot of salespeople were just waiting for things to pass so that they could, go back to the old way of thinking. Another thing, which is obviously something I think a lot of people are still talking about, is the technology. So two groups of companies kind of, separated from each other. The companies that said we need to use this Zoom or whatever until we can get back to normal. And then another group of companies who said, well, we might as well put some effort into this digitalization throughout our company and our sales organization, because this is now going to be part of our future. Yeah. And the latter group are going to prevail. McKinsey just did a research study last year showing that as of November 2021, more sales deals are being closed online and hybridly than face-to-face now, even business to business. So this is not something that is coming. it's already here. We just need to address this within the sales organizations and manage and lead from that stance.
All right. Well, when I'm listening to you, Karina, you remind me of a very good book in sales that was published by Neil Rackham, and it was called Rethinking the Sales Force. And it sounds like we're now getting out of COVID, and it's perhaps a good time to rethink your sales force. Rethink, how are we going to organize now this hybrid way? Of course, we all talk about, are we going to do Zoom, are we going to do face-to-face? And I think you made a very valid point there. Besides the face-to-face is for trust, but it's also for creativity. We need that that interruption, that chaotic meeting. Yeah. We need that one because that's the creative meeting. So we also, besides trust, also we need those creative moments. But then there's many other moments where we just exchange informations, which perhaps are more efficient online. When just redesigning that also means that we have to rethink how the whole sales force is organized. And perhaps this is one of the best moments ever to start rethinking the sales force. How are we now moving forward? All right, this was fantastic.
Thank you.
All right.
And thank you, by the way. I've never been compared to a good book before. I would take that as my hugest compliment to date.
And it's Neil Rackham, so it's the best. Absolutely.
You made my day.
All right. Thank you very much. It was great to have you on the show, Karina. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.